Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 118. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae dancehall and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae dancehall by the beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
It's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, doublets and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Sunday, May 27, 2018, GDS Entertainment proudly presents
Grooving on the Hudson.
That's right, Grooving on the Hudson. Memorial Weekend celebration. Music played by Road International. Selector Oxtail alongside King Shiloh International. All aboard the elegant Paddle Wheel Queens, One World's Fair Marina. Boarding 6 p.m. sharp from Flushing Queens Certified Shea Stadium. And Miss Marina will be selling 7 p.m. sharp. Also,
for tickets, People's Choice Furniture, Bronx, New York. Doris Restaurant, Queens, New York. G's Restaurant, Queens, New York.
Also,
WorldJamGlobal.com.
Also, complimentary dinner prize and surprises.
Come party with us.
Let's just take it slow. Sailing on the summer breeze.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. In the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't.
Well, I want to say a big good evening going out to each and every single one of you tonight.
I was swimming.
It's Saturday night.
Girls all.
It's 6 o'clock.
I was getting.
It's time for another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
Game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man.
Today I've got 2 guests with me.
It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all.
A regular when it comes to wrongful convictions. I'm one of the first guests I ever had on this program.
I paid for my
Honorable Satish Sekar, author and journalist.
I paid for my crime.
And we have also Michael O'Brien.
My time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Prison reform campaigner, public speaker, motivational speaker.
My crime.
And a man who spent 11 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit, having been sentenced to life for murder.
But I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over.
Don't forget you can join us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
And done, my brain was so.
Follow us on Facebook Live.
But I was nobody's chump.
And all other social media platforms.
Real Terminator, much meaner than.
If you've got a smartphone, you can follow us on the TuneIn app also.
Like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
But yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are live now.
Facing life in prison.
Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my.
I think sometimes we wonder how an innocent man can end up doing jail time.
To all of my.
Well, we've heard this story over and over and over again.
Worldwide.
And today we're going to hear another
man I couldn't beat. I was
despicable and outrageous miscarriage of justice.
Women and women.
This time it wasn't in America. It happened right here in the UK on our very own doorstep.
Changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man.
So hang tight, my friends.
And it ain't
get yourself comfortable.
Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell.
This is Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio alongside your host.
Already
Kervin, Julien.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Truly international, outernational, and worldwide.
I paid for my crime.
Streaming all over the world. And Jill from sunny Spain says hi. Holla.
Superfly, but I never got home my own supply.
Don't forget you can join me again tomorrow morning for my Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel Show between the hours of 8 and 10 tomorrow morning. But tonight, my friends, it's not about music.
Think it over since I got.
It's about people's lives.
To live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb. My brain was so numb. I was a real.
And another one from our wrongful conviction.
Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common.
Serious.
Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out.
Stand by.
Alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time. Paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison. Prison. Prison.
Well. Trying to cope with this living hell.
Not sure what things are like where you are, but it's been a very sunny and warm day here in the UK.
Trying to cope with this living hell.
And also, on the back of the latest royal wedding,
trying to cope.
Prince Harry marrying Meghan Markle.
This living hell. This living hell.
My wife was quite keen to watch it. Sorry, I'm not that sort of sentimentalist.
Our Father.
Well, I am, I think, but
how will it be thy name? Thy kingdom come.
There was bigger fish to fry. I had to get some sleep.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trust.
It's been a tough week.
Forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime.
Kimberly Griffin wants to say a big hi, hello.
Drive-by killer.
How you doing?
It ain't about nothing. He who was out sin, let him cast the first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again.
Stand by.
To all of my
we will be going live in about 45 seconds.
And put
to my two guests.
Stop stabbing each other.
The title of today's show
is
called The Paper Chase. without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my first guest, who's been sitting in the wings waiting very patiently. But there's a lot of noise in the background which needs to come off, please. Satish.
I can't do anything about it. It's outside.
Right, okay. So my first guest is Satish Sekar. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
I'm Satish. I'm here in Madrid this time, and we're coming back shortly to deal with a few more issues in relation to the Lynette White case and its effect on miscarriages of justice all over the place. But I was asked to take part in this program and obviously wanted to do that because Michael O'Brien's case is one of the most outrageous miscarriages of justice in Welsh and British history.
We're going to be talking to you for quite a bit in a while, Satish, as we get you to unravel the forensics evidence and you do the stuff that you do the best. But hang fire, sit tight. I know you're probably watching the football already, and when I last saw it, Chelsea were 1-0 up by way of a penalty. So you're probably sitting down there guffawing and enjoying yourself. But please do remember to keep those volumes down and muted so that we can have a real constructive debate here.
Like I said, there is I have nothing on here.
Well, then throw water over those people in Madrid. All right, and tell them we're on radio. We're live, streaming live right across the world. This is very important. Without any further ado, let me take you straight across to Michael O'Brien, who is, I believe, you're in Cardiff, Michael.
I am indeed. Hello to everybody.
Would you mind just sharing? We started off the show. I called the show "The Paper Chase." Some years ago, there was an absolutely horrific murder where somebody was killed. So a life was lost. But the double tragedy was innocent people were sent to prison for a crime they didn't commit. And you, in particular, I believe, spent 11 years of your life on a life sentence for a murder that you didn't commit. But before we talk about that fateful day of how your life was turned upside down, just so that we can get an understanding of how you lived, where you lived, and what your life was like. Tell us what life was like for you growing up, Michael.
Well, I lived on a council estate, and one of the biggest in Europe, in a place called Ely in Cardiff. And, we were all in the same boat. We didn't have much money. My father was an alcoholic. We had a difficult upbringing, because of that. But, I wasn't really into getting into trouble with the police or anything, like some of my friends were. And I was one of the lucky ones who had escaped, the police's attention. But on one occasion, I went out to try and steal a car with a number of friends of mine, trying to fit in and be one of the boys, as they say. And that's how I became known to the police, and, growing up in Ely, it's just like a normal council estate. They're dotted all around the country, and it's the same for all of us. We were all poor, come from a poor background, not much money, difficulty in schools, we didn't have the best of schooling, but we wasn't bad kids.
Yeah, I kind of know the Ely area very well. I lived up in Cardiff for about 20 years, down at the docks in particular. But once had a girlfriend up there in Ely, so I spent a little bit of time up there, and I do kind of know the area and its environment. So, what was your family life like, Michael?
Well, I got married very young. I was married at 18. I had a child called Kyle, and I had one on the way just before this all happened. And my life started coming together at that particular time. I kept away from crime. And, tried my best to keep out of trouble, but it wasn't always easy, coming from a poor background. It was difficult not to fit in with the boys. And as I said, the one night I went out and got my fingers burnt, we went to steal a car on a night in question, and my whole life came tumbling down. And this is when the miscarriage of justice was laid upon me.
Just before you got married, what was life like at home for you with, your mother, father? How was growing up?
It was difficult, you know, because my mother was subjected to domestic violence and things like that, which we witnessed. And I always said to myself that when I grow up, I would never treat a woman like that, you know, because of the things I saw. And I wanted to be a better person than my stepfather was. And I didn't want to make the same mistakes as what he made. So, you know, I did try to do the right thing. You know, I got married when I found out my girlfriend was pregnant. I stood by her, brought her back kids. I went to work, and I tried to earn an honest living. And it was very difficult because I didn't have many skills for the workplace. I mean, I had to take whatever jobs I could get my hold of, and I ended up working in a supermarket.
I mean, knowing Cardiff as I did, both in the area where I did live, Docks and Ely. I mean, the streets were really a big playground for the kids, and a very safe playground for the kids most of the time, right?
Yes, I think it's different from today. I think you couldn't, in today, it's very difficult to leave your kids out on the street. But when we were younger, you could leave your back doors open.
That's correct.
And things like that, and invite your neighbours in for a cup of tea, and it was a close knit community. Because everybody was in the same boat.
Yeah, and everybody knew everybody, didn't they? I mean, so it was
everybody knew everybody. That's correct. You know what I mean? Everybody knew. So the bad people who stood out, or as the police would call the bad people, the ones who got into trouble. It's not for me to judge people because of my background. But I mean, the way the police looked at it, that the ones who were known to the police were known to the police, and the ones who wasn't like, sort of thing. And I wasn't known to the police, but my friends were. And it's difficult when you've got a load of friends from school who are in trouble with the police, because I remember one of them saying to me once, "Oh, the police are trying to fit me up." And I said to him, "Well, you must be doing something wrong, otherwise the police wouldn't be doing this to you." That's how naive I was. And I really believed in the police. That's the way I was brought up, even though we had quite an extraordinary upbringing.
And that's the funny thing, is because I would have imagined up until this happened to you, the last thing that you'd have probably imagined is that police could actually fabricate to that extent. And it's an experience I'll probably, it will haunt you and it will stay with you for the rest of your life. But, in that innocence growing up, when your mate was telling you, "Oh, well, I think I'm being fitted up," there would have probably been a bit, I wouldn't have called it a chuckle or not even a laugh, but I would have imagined it was a very big, huge sigh of disbelief. And I would have imagined not many people would have believed him, whether it was you or anybody else, because the mindset, the mentality back then was you respected the law, and the law was a respectful, authority. It's what our parents brought us up to believe, and it's what they believed in turn. So here you are growing up into a fine young man, and now you've met your wife to be or whatever, and you're now married and you're having children, and life is going a little bit better for you. Tell us what happened. How was your world shaken? I mean, was it a knock on the door? Were you picked up off on the street? How did this all start for you? And then we'll come into Satish as we start to unravel some of the more particular intricate details.
It was on the 12th of October, the night that we stole a car, and it was the same time as the guy, Philip Saunders, was brutally murdered outside his back garden. And we were up to no good, trying to steal a car, trying to fit in, as I said earlier, being one of the boys. I wanted, because I never fitted in school. I mean, I had a hard time in school because we didn't have the nice clothes and everything like other people had. We were really poor, and it showed. But, I mean, on the night in question, there was a murder which happened 3 miles away from where we were. And, it took them about a month later when the police come to arrest us. And when they come knocking at the door, they actually smashed the door down in my sister-in-law's house in Grangetown in Cardiff and said, "Are you Michael O'Brien? Are you Ellis Sherwood? Are you Darren Hall?" We all said yes, to our respective names. We're arresting you for the murder of Philip Saunders. Well, I mean, my jaw just dropped and nearly hit the floor. And I can remember saying, who the F was Philip Saunders? And that was the exact words I used, because I didn't know who this guy was. I didn't have a clue what was going on. And I was only 19 at the time, and I was scared. I mean, there was police all around the house. They took me in handcuffs, and yeah, it was very heavy-handed what they did, taking us to the police station, and it was frightening.
At that point, were you aware of what the severity of the charge was, or what it was that they were trying to accuse you of?
Well, I don't think it really hit home until they started questioning me in the police station, and when they started saying, well, you must have changed your clothes, you must have had blood on your clothes. They was trying to play one off against each other, saying that Ellis had confessed to the crime, so did Darren, so why don't you tell the truth? And I knew they wouldn't have confessed to the crime, because I know none of us had did it. The only thing we were guilty of, or I was guilty of, was joyriding and allowing myself to be carried in a stolen vehicle. I mean, so for the first 4 or 5 pages of my statement, I did lie to the police, and I lied because I didn't want to get done for what we had done, which was to steal the car. And then I come clean, and I realised how serious it was, and I felt like, no, I'm not going to lie from now on. I'm going to tell him exactly what the score was. So I told them about the car, but they weren't interested. All they kept on going on is, you were the lookout. Ellis Sherwood was the one who murdered Philip Saunders. Darren Orr was the lookout. And then they swapped it around and said, well, the two of you went in there and done it. And I'm like, no, we didn't. And I never felt so frightened in all my life. They were banging the table. They were screaming and shouting at me. I've never, ever seen police act in a manner like this before. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
At any point during your questioning, Michael, was you ever did you ever get to a point where you felt like, if you just admitted to this, it would probably go away or get better?
No, I just didn't know what to think. I mean, I couldn't think straight. I mean, they kept us in overnight and took us to another police station, and I can remember crying my eyes out, and there was another person in the cell by the side of me, and I was telling him I didn't do it, and that's all I could say, and they held us overnight. They took us back then the next day for the questioning on the 2nd of November, and they questioned us again all day. They handcuffed me to hot radiators. They denied me access to food and water. And they denied me access to my lawyers. And I felt so isolated, I just didn't know what to think or do. I just couldn't believe this was happening.
How long did the questioning go on before they eventually decided to charge you?
Well, what they did, they kept us for 36 hours, which is nearly enough 3 days. You know what I mean? 36 hours of questioning we all had, plus the time we were in the police station, and they released us on bail pending further inquiries. And they said to us, they give us a date to come back to in December, but it didn't get to December. 1 week later, they come crashing down at my mother's house, smashed the door down again, and then said to my mother, we're charging him with murder. So they arrested us for the second time on November the 10th. Wow. And I can remember that day clearly. And my mother said to him, well, what are you doing them for? They haven't done anything. She said, we're charging them with murder. So they already made up their mind, even before we got arrested the second time, that they were going to charge us with the murder of Philip Saunders. They had it in their mind that we were the guilty ones, and that was that. They made their mind up even before we were questioned for the second time, and before we even seen any lawyers or anything.
Okay, well, we're gonna come back to you very shortly, Michael, and try and get an understanding of the rest of your experience and the in-depth experience that you had while you was incarcerated. But Satish,
yes.
So we're hearing that the police have gone and arrested. They're now talking about murder. Can you tell us in as much detail as you possibly can the circumstances that led to Jeffrey Saunders' death, how he was killed, and
Philip Saunders.
Philip Saunders, sorry. I don't know where I got Jeffrey from, but there you go. Well, as old age, dementia, call it what you like. I am getting old. I was 57 just the other week. So I've got excuses. But Philip Saunders, can we get an understanding of how he was killed, and what did the evidence suggest?
Well, he was a newspaper vendor near Cardiff Station, and it's been claimed that he was being surveilled beforehand, that he had been targeted because he was allegedly in the practice of taking his money home with him after the night's work, the day's work, and that if this is the case, it would suggest that he had been followed, so that whoever did this knew his pattern. Because there's no point, or would be no point, in attacking such a target if he had gone to the bank or if he had given the money to somebody else to look after. The odds are, and there were, the attack occurred at the back garden at that entrance to his house when, so as he was on his way home. He was hit on the head and brutally attacked with a sort of an implement. It was said to be a shovel. It may or may not have been. The actual weapon was never recovered. There was some evidence that you would expect, but it was complicated by the fact that it was raining that night. So some would have been washed away. But that doesn't mean all of it would have. This obviously occurred in November of 1987. So this was when DNA testing was in its rudimentary stage. It wasn't able to do what it can do now. And it was relying on less sophisticated and not that easy to use forensic science because of the atmospheric conditions at that time. So it was always going to be a difficult case, but there was evidence which should have said that you're looking for the wrong people, because they simply didn't fit the witness identification. There was a neighbour who saw what appears to have been the attack taking place, and her description of at least one of the perpetrators doesn't fit any of the three that were subsequently accused. And the police did actually have a list of suspects. Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was 42.
No, that is correct, Satish. You are correct.
And they were looking, so they should have been looking into all of those. And that should have meant that these people, or not these people, but there were clearly other lines of inquiry which should then have been disclosed, and it doesn't appear that it was. I think some were, but certainly not the whole lot of them.
So how did the evidence that they had, right, point to the direction of these three guys?
Really, it was Darren Hall had a habit of wanting to appear a bigger man than he was, if you can put it like that. So he would tell tales, and they wanted the tales that he was telling were inconsistent and ludicrous, but it was what they wanted to hear in the end. So he implicated himself, and Michael will tell you this himself. He used to refer to Darren as Bungalow. I'll leave him to explain the reasons why. But it was what they were basically looking at this and saying, this man has confessed, but he's not just confessed, he's implicated other people. If he wasn't responsible, he must know he's taken himself down as well. Would anyone be that dense? Well, as it turned out, yes, he was. And it took a long time to discover that.
Are there any similarities? Yeah, are there any similarities to Darren Hall and Stephen Miller?
Absolutely.
Yes, but there are also differences. Stephen Miller was highly suggestible and with a low IQ, whereas Darren was more compliant.
Just a bit more of a Walter Mitty.
Yes.
Compliancy is if you can convince somebody to say something is in their interest, They will say it even if it isn't what was the case. And that was the situation with Darren Hall.
Okay, so let me just fire that back again, because the point where I really want to get to. So here's Darren Hall implicating himself and others, but what in the evidence at the time of Philip Saunders' murder led the police to believe that these three individuals could possibly be involved in his death? What pointed them in that direction?
Well, it was, I believe it was they were out robbing cars or trying to steal cars that night. And in the course of that, Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Darren Hall pulled in over that? And he starts talking about it. It doesn't happen immediately. It happens over a month, if I recall.
You're spot on, Satish. Carry on. You're spot on.
And that as they start questioning him over minor other matters, he tries to buy his way out of this by saying, well, I know about this one.
Right.
And he digs a bigger and bigger hole for himself. But he also wants to be seen as a bigger man than he was, i.e. a bigger villain than he was. He thought that it would add to his street cred, if you want to put it like that, by owning up to this. And the end result was he took everybody down. And I mean, the bizarre thing with this is that, you know, with Stephen Miller, you bullied him. They were forced him to say what wasn't true. And as soon as you take him out of that environment and put him in an environment with people that he believes are on his side, he's then able to say, no, this is not what happened. And he immediately retracts a confession. With Darren Hall, it takes 9.5 years.
Wow. That's a very powerful opening. Now, there's just one more question I want from you, Satish, before I just shift over to Michael. Up until the point they've pulled in Darren Hall for the alleged minor offences, which then leads them on to this big, huge thing. Where was there evidence? Is there any paper trail as to where the evidence they already had was leading them prior to Darren Hall?
Yes, they had a well, let's call them prime suspect, and they had others, but they weren't able to make it stick on that one.
And so would I be correct in saying that at the time they had their prime suspect, they had a line of inquiry, they had a clear path and direction in which they were going in, but Darren Hall coming up and saying, hey, you know what, I know about this and I did it and I can tell you who else was involved, automatically made them switch their line of inquiry and focus on pinning this on these guys?
It played a major part in it, because from the police's point of view, and you can understand it up to a point, if you've got somebody saying, I did this, not only did I do this, these other two people did this with me, and he absolutely stubbornly refuses to retract from it, a lot of people would believe it. It's almost unbelievable that somebody would do that to themselves. And, you know, to other people, you can just about understand it because it's not them, and it's not their family, it's not their friends.
So here's the big $1 million question then, as far as that's concerned. In giving his statement and confessing to committing the crime and being involved in it, how accurate was his version of events in comparison to what the evidence suggested took place?
It wasn't. But I mean, the problem with all of this was that the gathering of the evidence was also hampered by the weather conditions that night. Where you get the issue of the comparison is that there were other lines of inquiry which were then completely shelved. For example, there was some bloodstained clothing. Now, they were actually very interested in this at first. But then when this comes, they seem to lose interest in this line of bloodstained clothing completely, and it disappears. There's a bottle of whiskey, which was apparently at least could have been have the DNA of the perpetrator on it. Nobody knows what's happened to these samples, because when you look at this at the time, it looks important. Then when you go down a different route, it's not so important. And the storing of it should be seen as very, very important, because you never know what's going to come back later. For example, like in the Lynette White case, and in several other cases, if you didn't store the original samples and store them properly and adequately, you wouldn't have been able to allow the crime scene to tell its story. The sad thing in this particular case is it didn't have the level of, how can I put it, the way that they treated the crime scene in the other cases enabled you to take a second look, and an efficient and effective second look. That hampered to begin with in this particular case, but it also raises the questions of even the bits that they had, what's happened to them.
Okay, so Michael, here we are. Darren Hall has walked into a police station, and not only has he implicated himself on a very horrendous and horrific murder, he's also, as part of his confession, implied and alleged that you and your co-accused took part in it. And I would have imagined while you were in the interview room being asked these questions, having been told that Darren Hall had confessed, I would have imagined that you was shouting out your innocence as loudly as you possibly could, right?
Yes, I was.
And how was that being received by the officers as you were being interviewed?
They didn't want to know. They wasn't interested. But can I just say this, that Darren Hall did make 14 different statements implicating other people as well. So they settled on the 14th one, which was implicating us. So I want to make it clear that, he had made confessions before, and unbeknown to me at that particular time, Darren Hall had confessed to a crime he hadn't done once before, but this didn't come out till after the appeal, which I'll speak about later on. And the other evidence against us, that a police officer alleges he overheard a cell conversation between me and Ellis Sherwood, which was highly incriminating, and it basically said that we committed the crime, and we admitted it. Now, this confession did not occur, because we had, so this was the other piece of evidence to go with Darren Hall's evidence, which got us, charged. There was also a number of other witnesses who were in serious trouble with the police. Some of them were actually pulled in as suspects, but then they were allowed to give evidence against us on the basis that they would get off on the charges they were on. So, it was criminal after criminal. There wasn't one decent witness who wasn't in trouble with the police who gave evidence against us. So that gives you some idea of what the police did.
Can I just add something to that? Because what Michael was saying about the overhearing of that confession in the cell area, the particular officer who overheard that confession, and I say overheard with inverted commas, had a habit of doing that. 5 years earlier, there was another case where exactly the same thing happened, and it just so happens that it's exactly the same prosecutor as well.
Wow. As you start to tie up these loops, they all begin to make sense. Now, just to go back to you again, Michael. So when they were trying to, because I'm sure, and again, I suppose I'm really trying to nail this particular point, because for me, right, when somebody is killed, there is a paper chase, there's a paper trail, right? There is a line of evidence. There's all this forensic. There's a scenario that has taken place which suggests that it happened this way, or it happened that way, or it was done with the right hand or the left hand, or it was done by one person or two people or three people, or there was multiple footprints or whatever. There is a scenario that takes place that, and I understand by what Satisha said earlier on, the investigation was hampered by the conditions of the night, but still based on what they were able to collect, they should have had an understanding, at the very least, with the expertise available to them and their resources, of kind of roughly how this took place. Now, when they were questioning you, What role did they say that you played in this? How did that tie up with what Darren Hall was saying to him? And how did that fit in with the evidence as it was, so to speak?
Well, I'll give you an example. There was a poster the police put out even after we were first arrested, and they put it out saying they were looking for a guy 6 foot tall, 15 stone build. Now I'll give you an example, Kerwin. I was 6 stone 6 when I was 20. You could not mistake me for that person. 3 people turn into 1. You know, how can that? It doesn't. You know, the maths don't add up. There was only one person saw attacking Philip Saunders. There wasn't 3, so the facts didn't fit that the jigsaw puzzle, if you like. And I'll give you an example. Darren Hall said that he killed Philip Saunders with a house brick, and so did we. Well, we all know that Philip Saunders wasn't killed with a house brick. Now, if you're confessing to something you've done and you've done it, you would know what the murder weapon was. He didn't have a clue.
Well, in fact, that's what I was trying to get at. You see, for me,
he didn't have a clue.
For me, when you're admitting to something and you are admitting that you did it, but yet your version of how this took place does not match up with the facts or the evidence, right? Surely alarm bells should ring that this ain't making sense. Something about this ain't right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So at what point did anybody challenge the verification or the clarification of what Darren had said took place in comparison to what had actually taken place?
Well, this is the point. I don't think the 3 solicitors who were representing us and the 3, did that correctly. That was the point. You know, they all they were saying is if Darren Hall's confessed, then we're all going to go down, and that's all they kept on telling us. So, regardless of whether the facts fitted what Darren Hall said or not, the fact that he was confessing and was prepared to go to prison. For something that he reckoned he did do, even though it was impossible, the scenario we put forward, there was nothing they could do, they said.
So here we are. Go on, Satish.
I was just going to say, one of the problems with this was that Michael and Ellis were saying all along, not only were they innocent, but that Darren Hall was as well, even though Darren Hall had pleaded guilty, had confessed and pleaded guilty. This is why people took so long to listen to them, or at least it's one of the reasons, because it was really difficult to believe anybody could be that special level of however you want to put it. It's really difficult to believe anyone would do that to themselves. But Darren Hall did. And I suppose that's the key thing with this.
I suppose
unless you understand the vulnerabilities that Darren has himself and why, about his whole character, which it took 9.5 years for Darren to actually see things for himself. And it was only at that point that he agreed to be looked at by various experts and then his confession was subjected to the rigorous scrutiny that it should have been subjected to all along. It's only when this happens that you can actually understand Darren Hall. And until you understand Darren Hall, you cannot understand this case. That's part of the problem of it.
Yeah, I suppose. Go on, Michael.
What the police did, they picked on a vulnerable person like Darren Hall and they built a case around him, like with a confession outside the cells by the police officer. They had a number of inmates who said that we confessed while we were on remand to him. We'd never seen before. There wasn't a shred of forensic evidence against us because that clearly indicates that we couldn't have been there. And yet they were using, they built a case around Darren Hall's confession. They're using criminals, and that's the picture which they did. And it's not the first time they've done it in South Wales police history. They've done it in other cases. You only got to look at the Cardiff 3, the Darvell brothers case, and many, many others, and at Hewins' case as well, where they manipulated the witnesses. And this is what happens. But you can clearly see the picture where they've they knew they had Darren Hall as the mainstay of the prosecution case, and if they built it around there with a couple of confessions and a couple of people saying, "Oh, well, he admitted to me he done it on remand," and that's all they had. That was all the evidence was. There was nothing else. No eyewitnesses. The eyewitnesses were on our side. They said they only saw one person. So how could three of us be going in there killing Philip Saunders when there was only one person? So, well, I mean, the eyewitnesses were on our side.
As Michael was saying, this is yet another of the cases where if you get a confession, no matter how ludicrous the confession actually is, if you take the time to look at it and analyse it properly against all the other facts in the case, it trumps everything. I mean, if you look at Stephen Miller's confession in the Cardiff Five, and I'm just taking that as an example, and the reason I'm doing that is that in this, if you actually look at the verdict in the Cardiff Five case, 3 get convicted and 2 acquitted on what is legally the same evidence. There's one crucial difference. It's all Stephen Miller's tape, 18. And that tape says, Stephen Miller says Tony Paris was kneeling over Lynette. He was effing evil. He was stabbing her repeatedly in the belly. All you need to do, and I'll never ever understand why this didn't happen, is look at the pathology evidence. The forensic pathology tells you that Lynette, what happened to Lynette, appalling as it is, wasn't what was in the Miller confession. She wasn't stabbed repeatedly in the belly area. She was stabbed repeatedly in the breasts, not the belly. There was hardly anything in the belly area. How did it take 30 years for this to come out?
And these are the interesting questions, the vital questions that needs to be asked and answered, because when we start looking at the evidence as confessed by both Stephen Miller and Darren Hall, when it doesn't fit the criteria or the crime scene, right? When does an official, when does somebody in authority, when does somebody who has the power and the control to do the right thing say, well, hang on a minute, no matter what this guy is saying, no matter what we're hearing right now, something just doesn't fit?
Well, I'd say it's not even something just doesn't fit. It is, this confession is spectacularly ludicrous, and it cannot be the basis of a safe and satisfactory conviction. It cannot be the basis of proving somebody's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. It basically says this person doesn't know what happened.
Can I interject there, if I may? Right, when I was mentioning earlier on that Darren Hall had confessed to a crime he didn't do before, the magistrate's court said to Darren Hall, "You're a Walter Mitty character," and told him to, grow up, because what he did, he confessed to a number of car thefts. But at the time he was supposed to have been doing these cars, he was actually in with his solicitor. He had a solicitor's appointment at that time. So his solicitor come forward and said Darren Hall couldn't have done those crimes because he was with me. Now, the police knew this before this confession. So, they knew that Darren Hall had a history of confessing to things he hadn't done. So that makes it even worse. That makes the prosecution more malicious.
Yeah, and I would say that if there isn't a duty on the prosecution to have disclosed that to his co-accused, there absolutely should have been.
They never disclosed it, I can assure you.
Yeah, well, there should be. I mean,
absolutely.
if there is such an obligation now, that is something that should be learned from this case to make sure this never happens again. There must be a proper onerous duty with consequences for breach of it if you do not provide exculpatory evidence, especially if it is of the quality as this was.
And that's why, in respect, I mean, a lot of focus, because at the time, we had this conversation the other day, and I'm going to probably, it's a proper time to introduce it now. The Cardiff 3 was the high-profile case at the time, and I suppose just a little bit was overshadowing any look-in on this particular case. And you guys weren't set. You didn't have no campaign. You didn't have anybody shouting in your corner. You didn't have anybody, uncovering stuff for you that would help you in any way. And it looks like your defense lawyers were just sitting pretty. But when you look at the similarities between the two vulnerable individuals, Stephen Miller and Darren Hall, there is a clear understanding that the police have utilized the vulnerability of these individuals, right, to get access to a conviction or a charge that probably wouldn't have got going by via any other means, right?
Absolutely. They've done it in the Darvell brothers case, the Swansea sex shop murder case as well. Very similar. The three cases which got all the same hallmarks. It's the Cardiff Three, our case, and the Darvell brothers.
And I'll add one to that, the Merthyr Tydfil one, in which there were actually two people who were very vulnerable, both of whom were alibi witnesses with Donna Clark, and were leaned on until they were no longer alibi witnesses for her.
I totally agree with that.
And then here's the thing, right? In utilizing or using the vehicle of the vulnerable person, it can be said that there was a deliberate attempt to misrepresent justice.
Well, I think it's what I think miscarriage of justice doesn't do us any favors, because that sounds like it's a mistake. These were deliberate acts by the police to get convictions because they couldn't find the real people responsible. And I mean, I would say it's a malicious prosecution, and that's what I did exactly, tried to sue him for.
Well, I'd go further because while there is no doubt that the first stage of this was the police, and the police did get it wrong. The police did use methods which were questionable, to put it mildly, in at least some of these cases. They couldn't have got away with this. They could not have done this and had any point of doing this if there wasn't a culture throughout the criminal justice system that patted them on the back, promoted them, gave them higher wages, and looked on them as crime-fighting heroes for solving these cases. We cannot keep letting the rest of the criminal justice system off the hook for this. They are equally responsible for allowing this culture to develop.
Yes, the solicitors, the barristers. I mean, even go down to the magistrates' court. They seem to believe everything what the police say. And then they put you on remand, and you haven't got, we didn't stand a chance, And I mean, when I was on remand as well, I want people to know the pain that we went through. Not only were we charged with something we never done, I lost my daughter, who was 4 months old, of a cot death when I was in prison. I had to deal with that. I was 19 years of age. I was just about surviving, and if it wasn't for my family, I don't think I would have made it.
Here's the thing, right, Michael? You said in the opening, when we talked about you and your life and your upbringing, etc., you wasn't a criminal. You definitely wasn't a career criminal. You didn't really fit in very well in some circles, although you had some friends that got into trouble. You weren't one of them. But on one particular night, you went out and did this thing, which has obviously inevitably led you to this point. But your lifestyle was far removed from that of those that were accustomed to A, getting into trouble, B, being on remand and spending days or nights in police cells, etc., and going through these particular scenarios. How did it feel? Because there you are. You've accepted the fact that you was out, joyriding in a car, facilitating the theft of a vehicle is about the most that you could probably be charged with on that account. But here you are now, and you are on remand for an horrific murder. Now, when did that start to dawn on you, and how did that make you feel?
Well, for the first few months, I was really tearful. And I can remember the one day, November the 30th, I started having a nervous breakdown, and I didn't know I was having it at the time, but now I realise what it was. And I kept on crying all the time, and I collapsed on the stairs. And the prison officer said to me, "Why don't you get yourself together, O'Brien?" And I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. I wanted to tell him, if I could get my words together, don't you think I would? And I was having a nervous breakdown because of what was happening to me, and I couldn't do anything. I was taken over to the hospital, and over the hospital wing in the prison, and I had to stay there. And then they had to, they filled me up with drugs, prison drugs and stuff, to try and sort my head out because I was in such a bad state. I could not cope with what was happening. It was too much. The only thing I had to talk to anyone about was my innocence. That's the only thing I used to drive everybody mad. All the prisoners on remand, I'm innocent. And that was the only thing I wanted to talk about was my case and how I didn't do it and how I was being framed. And that was the only thing which kept me going, knowing that I didn't do it.
Here's the thing, Michael. While you was on remand and while you was waiting for your trial and while you was pestering everybody, so to speak, with your innocence, because everybody in jail says they're innocent. How believed were you by those that you were incarcerated with, on remand with?
Well, I can remember when we got found guilty. I want to tell you about this because this is a true story. When I was found guilty, one inmate come up to me and said, "I thought you said you were innocent," and I said, "I am." And he obviously, he was a career criminal, and he didn't even think that police fitted people up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a bit of a shock for me, and that actually happened. That actually did happen at Cardiff prison.
So, in other words, because you were convicted, then you must have done it, was the consensus?
Absolutely, yes.
But so let's go back to before you were sentenced, while you were actually on remand and shouting out to all that who you could get to listen to you. How believed did you think you were? I mean, did you speak to, for example, I know many people who've spoken to screws and prison officers, and even the prison officers have been, well, I don't actually think that you could have done this. If what I say has got anything to go by. I've seen that, I've witnessed that, I've spent time in jail myself, so I'm fully aware of what the relationships can be like between inmates and prison officers.
There was one or two. Sorry, Kervin.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, there was a couple of officers who did believe that I didn't do it, but they couldn't come out and say it. But they had sympathy for me. You could tell the way they were behaving towards me. You could see that they're trying to make my time as easy as possible. So you could tell the ones who were genuine, who believed in me, and the ones who didn't. The ones who didn't believe in me were quite nasty. They were telling me, "Oh, after a few years, your family will disown you, and they'll forget about you." And this, that, and the other. So that was the other side of the coin. But there was a prison officer there, and I want to thank him. His name's Officer P.O. O'Brien. His name was same name as me, and he was brilliant. What happened was when my daughter died, I tried to smuggle in a chain of my daughter's, and I didn't follow the procedures, and I got caught bringing it in. I'm not a criminal. I don't know how to do these things, and I tried to bring it in my shoe. Anyway, I got caught. The long short of it, I got caught, and I should have been placed on report, as you know.
Yeah.
And disciplined. But he pulled me into the office. He said, "Listen, Mr. O'Brien," he said, "I know what's happened with your daughter. I know you've lost her and everything, and I know this chain means a lot to you, but don't ever let me see you do that again. Bring it through the things. If you would have gone through the proper procedures, we would have helped you." And that was the first kindness an officer had shown me. And his name was Mr. O'Brien. And ironically, when I have come out of prison and I was doing a book launch, Mr. O'Brien did turn up at one of my book launches. So it was good to see him, So I know that's going a bit further ahead.
No, that's fine. I mean, a lot of bad things can be said about prison officers and the prison experiences, but I've found that when you're honest, when you're straight, when you deal right, most officers, especially when you're innocent, tend to come alongside you and even have a little protective arm around you, so to speak. So I'm not surprised by that in the slightest. And I think our prisons are a lot different to some of the prisons that you find around the world. A lot less torturing, so to speak. But here you are now. You're on remand. You're trying to talk to all of these people and tell them that you're innocent. Some of them believe you and some of them don't. Irrespective of those that don't believe you, you're hell bent on trying to prove your innocence. What support were you getting, and what hope were you getting from the visits you were getting? Because your solicitor would have often visited you, I'd imagine, and there would have been conversations about how you're going to proceed with this case and how it's going to be defended and what the likely outcome was going to be. How was that working with you and your solicitor?
Well, it was just doom and gloom. They couldn't see no way around Darren Hall's confession. That's what they were kept on telling me. You know, that was the thing. It was saying, like, you know, if Darren Hall goes into the witness box and says he done it and he was with you, then we're all going down.
Satish, one second, Michael. Satish, your wrapping up of paper and stuff is making some very loud noises this end.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, carry on, Michael.
I've lost my train of thought now for a minute. Sorry. I was, you know, the way some of them were treating me in prison as well. Like, you know, I'm going to put it like Officer O'Brien was good, but when my solicitor was coming in and saying to me like that, I don't think there's any hope. I think you're going to get found guilty. I mean, I just knew my life was on the balance, but in the back of my mind, I thought they don't convict innocent people. They only convict guilty. They can't convict innocent people. So I always had that little light at the back of my head saying, no, they don't convict guilty, you know, innocent people at all, only the guilty. So I still had that fire there, and it kept me going until the trial. And then when I seen what the trial was like and then what they put me through, I knew we were doomed. I knew we were going to end up with a life sentence. I didn't know
because you were being tried by judge and jury, right? Did you have any hope that the jury would see through all of this?
I was hoping so, but I just knew, because if Darren Hall was going to go in a witness box and say that we did it, then you've got a police officer of 30 years experience saying he overheard a confession outside the cells that me and Ellis confessed, you know, while we were in it, and he wrote the confession down, and the confession went something like this: you're talking about life. And I was supposed to have replied, being on remand means nothing. Ellis was supposed to reply, shut up, you're talking about life. You know, and that was the thing of the conversation. You know, I'm scared I might have to tell him what happened. Well, that conversation did not happen. But I knew if that police officer went in the box and said that, and the jury believed it, it was corroborative evidence with Darren Hall's confession, and I knew we were doomed. I knew it.
So,
and it's a horrible feeling when you watching somebody frame you before your eyes, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's one of the most horrible, scariest feelings in the world, because I was as helpless as a child without his mother. I couldn't do nothing.
I can imagine that. Now, Satish, you've got Michael on remand with two other gentlemen. You've got one fellow who's actually confessed, implicating the other two. The other two are adamant that they haven't done it and have not pleaded guilty. They're not confessing. There's no confession from them.
But it's not just that. They've also said the one who's confessing is innocent too.
No, agreed.
That's
okay.
so hard.
Yeah, agreed. So you've got the one that's confessed, and you've got the two that hasn't confessed, and now they're waiting to be tried. They're on remand. There's a case being built up against them by the prosecutors, and supposedly there is a defence being prepared for them by their own barristers. Where did that go wrong, Satish? Because surely, if the defence was doing their job, they would have been able to try and find a way to break down this confession and present it for what it was.
Wasn't so that easy to do. If you had access to Darren Hall, if you had access to have him tested, as subsequently happened, nearly 10 years in, then yes, you would have had all the ammunition you needed to challenge this. And this is another thing that needs to be looked at, because if you have somebody confessing in a manner that is an accusation, what about the right of the co-accused? Either they should be tried separately and their jury doesn't get to hear the confession.
Yeah.
Or you are treated as if you are confessing and give evidence, then you are treated as a witness, and you then allow the defendants to have access to have them properly checked in a way that and their evidence checked. the problem with this case, and in another one where I'll use a very similar thing, which is makes the point even starker, and that is the Merthyr Tydfil case. Because what happened in that particular case is that you had a 15-year-old single mother who was originally an alibi witness for Donna Clark. They basically leaned on her, drove a coach and horses through what Pace was supposed to be about. But because by the time they actually have the bring the case forward, she's no longer a suspect, she's no longer a defendant. All the protection of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act at that point in time has gone out of the window because she's a witness. So you can basically put as much pressure as you want on somebody in order to turn them into a witness. And at that point, there is no protection under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. The ones that you would have if you were a suspect have gone. And the end result was that having driven a coach and horses through the intent of the legislation, this witness becomes the star witness against Donna Clark. Then they use that witness to lean on another one who is also compliant but was never properly tested. So you never actually get to the truth of what happened with this other one. She just chops and changes all along. And the end result is you don't get to actually bring the case forward properly. And if you had looked at the case in the whole, you would actually see that not only is Donna Clark innocent, her case is not as strong as Annette Hewins'. Annette is more than innocent, if I could use that. I know it sounds a strange and odd way of putting it, but what I mean by that is she wasn't just somebody who should have been exonerated and was exonerated at the Court of Appeal. She should have been vindicated because the clear facts say, the scientific evidence show Annette Hewins is not only not guilty of the crime that she was convicted of, she could not have been guilty of it. She was absolutely 100% innocent, and they knew it. But the evidence wasn't allowed to speak. And I know this for a fact because it took a long, long time. And after Annette's case went to the Court of Appeal, they were trying to destroy the house. I went along with some other people and basically demonstrated scientifically it wasn't possible for Annette to have been guilty, and they accepted it. But they've never come forward and said, we actually accept that Annette Hewins has been vindicated and we are sorry for what happened.
And that's shame on them. So
absolutely. But going back to Michael's sort of, with this particular situation, you have the problem with that they were facing is they didn't have access to Darren Hall to challenge them. Compare this with the two other cases Michael's mentioned, which is Cardiff 5 and the Darvell brothers. In both of those cases, the people who were forced to confess confronted their confessions and rejected them. And they then allowed themselves to be examined and the confessions to be examined. That's why you know the Miller confession is a pile of nonsense. This is why you know Wayne Darvell's confession is a pile of nonsense. And eventually, it's why you know Darren Hall's was. But it took a long, long time for Darren to get to the same stage. And this is why. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say 9 years of somebody else's life. But
yeah,
lessons have to be learned. And I know we've got a lot more to go into this story, and we're nowhere near finished yet. But lessons have to be learned because at this point, and again, I'm trying to deal with it at this area because that's where we are. We're still at the remand point. I don't really want to step into the convicted point yet, but we're still on remand, and the defence is meant to be building a case to support these guys who have not confessed to killing, irrespective of whatever Darren Hall have said. Now, surely the defence had Michael's and his co-accused defence. Surely he had a responsibility to delve into Darren's statement, the evidence, and the fact that, as Michael quite rightly pointed out, that Darren had confessed to killing with a brick housebreak, which was absolutely impossible. Surely these little areas should have been where the defence would have been starting to prepare that defence for them, and looking to question how on earth that this confession can stand when it's based on such falsities.
Yeah. There's no argument to that. Absolutely correct.
So, at what point did your barristers, did your solicitors, Michael, ever discuss with you the discrepancies on Darren's statement and confession?
Well, I was the one who brought it up to them. They wasn't the one who brought it up to me, and I was trying to argue the point that, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's done 14 different confessions, said different things about different people. He implicated other innocent people. Lucky they had an alibi, otherwise they would have been in serious trouble. They could have been brought in with me, Ellis, as well. And, I mean, to me, it was quite clear that this guy was... I called him a bungalow because he had nothing upstairs. He had nothing downstairs either, by the looks of it. You know what I mean? And that's my way I described it. I said it a bit more forceful than that, mind. You know what I mean? But not for radio.
Yeah.
You can imagine. Yeah. But it was obvious to me from day one that this man, there was something wrong with him. I tried to explain to the jury that this man is. There's something wrong with him, but I was only 19. How do I explain a guy like Darren Hall to the jury when I'm not an expert in that particular field?
Yeah.
And I was supposed to be an expert in that particular field because that was the only way I was going to, and if I didn't explain it properly, which obviously I didn't, that's why he was found guilty. We were found guilty. I didn't do the job properly. But it was my lawyer's job to do it.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point. And the fact of the matter was, it wasn't your job to try and find you innocent. It was your barristers and solicitors' jobs to find you innocent based on the information they had. Did you ever feel that your barristers or your solicitors, those that represented you, did you ever feel that they believed you? Did you think did it?
Yes, I think my solicitor did believe me. I had a worrying conversation about him because when I was on remand, there was another gentleman who come in, and there was a confession outside the cells in his case, and it happened to be the same police station, Canton Police Station, not the same officer, but the same verbal admissions, to the crime. And when we got talking together, we had the same solicitor as well. And when I pointed this out to my solicitor, saying this copper must have a history of making up these confessions outside the cells, he said, you can't say that. He said, you can't say that, But I did in the witness box. And when the judge pulled me up on it and said, were you there, Mr. O'Brien? I said, no, I wasn't on the other person. Well, he said, well, you can't say it. And he said, who told you about the other cases? I said, my lawyer did. And he put his head down. He wouldn't even look at me.
So there was definitely gaping holes that could have been picked apart.
Absolutely could have been torn apart straight away. They could have prevented this miscarriage of justice. And what I did find out also is they knew that this officer had a habit of making confessions outside the cells, because as Satish pointed out, a few years earlier, another man went on trial for murder. And again, Stuart Lewis come up with his pen and paper, reckons he heard a cell confession, and the jury called him a liar. The jury actually called him a liar in the case, and they acquitted the gentleman of the crime. Had we known about that case and another 3 others where he'd made up confessions outside the cells with, so it wasn't just one, there was 3 others, the Welsh conspiracy case, for instance, in 1984, if the jury would have known that at my trial, and they would have known that Darren Hall had confessed to something he hadn't done before, the case wouldn't have got off the ground. But this is what the solicitors and barristers should have been doing for us. And they let us down badly. And I do feel not bitter about it, but angry enough to find out that one of the solicitors has won an award for for his clients, for giving them good service and everything. And that was when I first come out.
Wow,
that's unbelievable.
And I should have knocked you for 6. So not only were you
the wound.
Yeah, not only were you failed by the police who carried out an absolutely inept investigation, but you was also failed by the very justice system that should have been making sure that there was a fair trial in place.
The whole system let me down, and this is the thing. I think Satish is right. It's not just the police. We can't keep saying, "Oh, the police this." The fact is that what about the Crown Prosecution Service? Allowing this kind of evidence to go before the courts. I mean, you got to look at the CPS. You got to look at the defence lawyers. You got to look at the judge. You got to look at the magistrates' court. Right from the bottom all the way up to the top. You got to look at, and that's why we need some sort of inquiry into all these cases in Wales which have happened, and there's been too many of them, and not one person has been brought to book for these particular cases.
Now we're going to be getting into that very shortly because I do believe that that's probably where we're going to round it up. But I just want to I want to go now. We want to move on just a little bit, and so you've done the remand part, and now you're going up for sentencing, or you're going up, and it's the end of the trial. You're on trial. A, how did the trial go for you? And B, how did the conviction hit you once the plea came back that they had found you guilty? Once the verdict came back, that you were found guilty. How did that leave you then?
I was absolutely stunned when the verdict came in. It was on the 20th of July, 1988. And I will never forget that day, because I remember turning to my father when they brought in the verdict of guilty. I said, as long as you, Dad, know that I didn't do it, that's all what matters. And that's what I said to my father, my stepfather. And I had tears streaming down my eyes. And I can remember grabbing a hold of the dock bars, because I nearly collapsed. I was in such a terrible state. I just felt my life was over, and it was, in a sense, it was over. My wife walked out on me just before the trial as well. That was another thing which happened to me, because she couldn't cope with what had happened. We'd lost our daughter. And then there was myself then, her husband, inside for something he hadn't done. And her brother, Ellis Sherwood, who was inside for something he hadn't done. It was just too much for her. And it just tore the family apart. It just tore us apart.
So now you're being sentenced. And was you always aware that this was going to carry a life sentence?
Yes.
So you knew from the get-go, if you were found guilty, the inevitability was that you was going to be getting a life sentence for this?
Yes, my solicitor told me that, yes. There was only one sentence for murder. He kept on saying that they can give. There's no other sentence they can give. And he was explaining to me about the tariffs, that I'd have to do 14 or 15 years before I got my name, before I would come out on parole or anything like that. And I said, well, I'm not interested in parole. This is about my innocence. I either come out an innocent man or I don't come out at all. And that was my attitude, because I wanted to come out an innocent man, because I knew I didn't do it, and nothing else mattered. But what I didn't know at the time was, if you protest your innocence, they're very unlikely to let you out. Because of they're saying you can't address your offending behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Which carries a double-edged sword, doesn't it? You want to plead your innocence, but you can't, because you'll never get out then. And some people, and I'm fully aware it's happened in America on several occasions, where they've just had to accept, the plea, even though they've been released early, and the states have actually released them, exonerated them, but not without squashing the conviction. And that's got to be a difficult place to be. So here you are. Let me just ask Satish, at what point did you get on board Michael's case?
I visited him when I was seeing Yusuf and a few others, so I knew about it, I would say, in between 91 and 92. But at that time, I was... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, so at that point, he was now convicted and he just started his sentence.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's the same with the Cardiff 5. I wasn't involved in that until after they had been convicted. But it was one of these cases where you looked at it and you knew instinctively something was wrong, but you also knew it was going to be a lot harder to deal with than the Lynette White case, simply because that one was absolutely blatant and publicly blatant. Whereas this one, all the material was there, but it was harder to deal with because, for example, Darren Hall's interviews had not been tape recorded. Even though they had the facility to do so, they didn't do it. And it was the tape recording of the Miller interviews that led to it collapsing.
Yes, correct.
In the Cardiff 5 case. So you kind of knew that the methods that were being used at that time were very, very likely to have been used here, but you didn't have the
evidence,
smoking gun proof of it that you had in the Lynette White case. And also you had the science and the forensic science, you had the alibi. So with that case, it was one of these where you knew it was going to be overturned. It was when it was going to be overturned. And I took a decision which some people won't like, and that was I concentrated on the Lynette White case because I knew they were going to have to own up to it. Yeah. And they were going to have to own up to it sooner rather than later. And once that happened, it was going to open the door for everybody else. Yeah. Well, I say everybody else. I can't say everybody else. It's the wrong thing to say. But it was going to open the door for those who had been protesting but didn't have the evidence as clear or as available as it was in the Lynette White case. So this was one where you looked at it and you thought, there's something wrong here, but I can't deal with it right now. You have to make this precedent in order to be able to come back and deal with this.
Absolutely, but what I want to find out from you really is, we normally have to pick our battles, don't we? We don't just go in and fight every fight. It's not everybody that says that I'm innocent. You're going to say, okay, well, I'll go and fight for you. What stood out in this particular case that made you go, right? Yeah, I can see it.
It was a number of things, but I mean, it was one, there was the lack of the forensic science, two, the evidence that they were of who they were looking for. Because if you look at the Lynette White case, there's a similarity in that they release photo fit of people they are looking for, and the people who subsequently stand trial don't look anything like it. Yeah. And it was exactly
absolutely
the same
ludicrous. Yeah. So here you are now, Michael. You've now been convicted. You've been sentenced. You've been given a life sentence for a crime that you haven't committed. And the outlook at this present moment in time is that you'll be spending the rest of your life in prison.
Yes.
What was your first thoughts as you were? Because very often most people don't even understand what it's like when you're down in the court cells. Then they come and get you because now you're going in the van that's going to be taking you to the prison, and then you're on that prison ride. And I can remember on several occasions when I was on my way, you're sitting down and you've got that little window to your right and you're looking out and you can see people going to the shops and you're going to know that all of these thoughts are going through your mind. You won't be doing that for a while. Maybe somebody lighting up a fag on a street corner. I used to smoke back then, so it'd be a case of, oh, well, I won't be doing that in that kind of freedom. And you just all of these thoughts are going through your head as you're in the meat wagon on your way to the prison. What was your thoughts as you sat?
I didn't want to live anymore. I wanted to commit suicide. I just didn't have the guts to do it. That's how low I felt. I thought my life was over. I had nothing to live for anymore. And then what I started doing then, I started when a couple of weeks later they shipped me out to a place called Long Lartin in Evesham, which is one of the most dangerous prisons in the country, I would say.
Yeah, I've seen. I've not been inside there as an inmate, but I've visited. In fact, Yusuf was there.
And I started on the drink and drug spiral for the first year I was in. 1989, I arrived in Long Lartin, and it wasn't until 1990 that I was in a terrible state. When there was other innocent people fighting their cases there, like the Cal Bridgewater 4. I don't know if you remember that case.
I remember that case very well.
Well, Vincent Hickey came up to me and said, what are you doing? Paddy Hill and all them were there as well. Hugh Callahan, I think, was there then as well. And there was other innocent people, and they were telling me, listen, you got to sort yourself out. You got to start writing letters. You got to do things. You can't expect anybody else to do it for you. And I collapsed the one night, because of the amount of drugs I took, and I realised I was in serious trouble. So I went down to see the prison psychiatrist, and told him all my problems and whatever. I started getting myself off the drugs and everything, and then I started getting angry. And I thought, right then, what must I do? People are saying I got to study law, so okay, let's go and have a look at the Archibald. So I went down the library, picked up an Archibald, And then I started finding out then there are people who confess to crimes they haven't done because of the people they are. You know, there was the Judith Ward case, 91, would spring to mind. And there was, the Birmingham 6, obviously, the Guildford 4.
Yep.
And there was all these cases, the Cardiff 3, the Darvell brothers. I mean, all these cases kept on coming up when I started studying. And that's all I did. And I got myself on education courses. And then, believe me, when I say fight back, Kervin, that's exactly what I did. The anger kept me going. I got the papers involved. I wrote to journalists, MPs. I wrote to 660 MPs between 92 and 93. That's how desperate I was. I wrote to every single one of them. I wrote to human rights lawyers, MEPs, House of Lords. I mean, I went on hunger strike a few times in prisons as well with a number of other inmates to highlight our cases. I mean, there was no stopping me. I was like a madman. There was just no stopping me. Once I got that fight in my belly, and people helped me. And if it wasn't for people like the Birmingham 6 and the Cowbridge Water, I probably would have sunk.
Yeah.
But it was they who helped me and put me on the right road and got me cleaned up. And the psychiatrist, her name was Fiona. I got to thank her. I haven't met her since I've been out, but I mean, she was an amazing woman. She didn't judge me. She just helped me get off the drugs, and the fight back began, and I started educating myself, and the rest is history.
Wow. Well, here's the thing. Some cases when there's real tragedies and miscarriages of justice, some of them you can start get rays of hope quite quickly, but yours was just going on and on and on. And obviously, again, we've already said it. It was after 9 years. You spent 11 years in jail, but year 2, year 3, year 4. Year 5, year 6, year 7, you're still fighting. You're still trying to get people to hear you. You're still beating down doors and banging your head on brick walls. Were you giving up hope at any point, or was you always fighting?
From that moment on, from the moment I got off the drugs, no, I did have down days, when I thought, I know I'm not going to get out unless I get my name cleared. And a probation officer said to me, with an attitude like that, O'Brien, me protesting and saying, you're never going to get out. And so she reaffirmed what I knew, that if I didn't get my name cleared, I probably wasn't going to see the streets again. So it just made me fight even harder, And as I said, I educated myself. I'd done English, maths, you name it, city and guilds. I come out with a clutch of exams, which I never had before I went in. I had no qualifications whatsoever, but I knew I had to educate myself inside to get myself out, and that's exactly what I did. And I even made legal history when I was inside prison by taking the Home Secretary to court and the governor of a prison for banning journalists from visiting prisoners.
Wow.
And, you know what I mean? I made legal history. I went all the way to the House of Lords, and I actually won the case. I mean, it's amazing, So that's how desperate I was to study law, and how engrossed in the law I actually was. I've changed the law 6 times since I've been out now as well. You know what I mean? And I carried on my studies, and I went to college, I went to university, and I've done useful things, and it all stemmed from that meeting I had with some of the Birmingham 6 and the Cowbridge Water, who helped me get off my bum.
That's a great and amazing story. Now, at some point, towards the end, you get the news that you're going to be getting an appeal. How did you get that news? What do you think? What do you think was the definitive turning point? What was the evidential fact that made them consider the appeal? And how did you receive that news?
Well, first of all, the BBC Week In Week Out team, which is what we call the Welsh Panorama, done a programme on us, and they investigated the case. Most of the witnesses retracted their evidence, saying that the police put them up to giving evidence, and they told the truth. Darren Hall admitted that what he said was lies all along as well. And then we looked for an expert then to see about the confession outside the cells. We managed to get 2 experts to say that those were not my words. Like a speech therapist, you know what I mean? Who can, where I come from, I'll give you an example. Where I come from, we don't use I may have to tell him what happened. I would say, I might have to tell him what happened. So the wording and the posh words which was used in the confession were of the police officer, and we managed to establish that. And the BBC, played a significant part in helping me there. It went to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is the body which looks at miscarriages of justices. They then called in an outside police force, and everything I said 10 years ago, what the police did to me, was in that report. He backed me up.
Wow.
And it was Alan Partridge of the Thames Valley Police.
Wow.
Handcuff into the hot radiators, 115 breaches of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, denial of access to my lawyers, denied food and water. I mean, this was torture. This was what they've done to us. It was Article 3 says nobody should be treated to inhumane, degrading treatment, torture or punishment. Well, I was subjected to all of that at that time in 1987, and this police officer backed up everything I said.
Absolutely horrendous. But
it was an amazing feeling.
I can imagine.
It was an amazing feeling. What I did, I pestered the barristers to go for bail, and they laughed at me. They said, "You're not going to get bail on a murder charge." I said, "Come on, we got an outside police force now saying I'm innocent." So I convinced the 3 solicitors to go for bail, and lo and behold, what did we do? We went and got bail. We made legal history.
Yeah, I do remember the Cardiff 3 getting bail while they were, the case was stopped and they were given bail, and then we had to return to hear the reasons why.
No, Kervin, that's not quite the case.
Okay.
The judges announced they were quashing the convictions and that they would give their reasons later, and they did 6 days later.
That's right. That's correct. You've got to forgive me. I'm getting old. I told you I'm 57. Dementia sets in, so I don't remember everything as it was.
No, I set in a long time earlier than that. You know that.
Right. So. Yeah, we've got a lot of outside interference noise again, gentlemen, and we really need to keep that down if we can, please. So now you've now gone to court. You've now won at a court of appeal. You've been released. You've been given bail, but the fight didn't stop there for you, did it, Michael? You didn't just come out of jail. You didn't just come out of jail and go, "Well, that's it. I'm free. Let me go and sit down and put my feet up." What happened next?
No, I didn't. No, when I come out. I had to wait a year for the actual appeal. I was released on bail pending the appeal. So I did a lot of campaigning on other people's cases, like Annette Hewins' case. And, Jonathan Jones supported us as well, like when we were on appeal. And I done as many TV programs as I could. I went on This Morning. I went on, I told everybody about what happened to me. I went on Kilroy. I went on Trisha's show. I mean, you name it, I went on there. Bar from Loose Women. I don't think I'd fit in there, but never mind. But I went on as many TV programs as I could to highlight my case. Esther Ranson done a program on me. I done a couple of programs to do with Jeremy Bamber's case as well, because I believe Jeremy Bamber is the longest serving miscarriage of justice victim in the British system at the moment, 33 years. And he's done. And I mean, I'm still fighting for his case there. I called for a public inquiry. Me and Satish and many others gathered together, and we done a panorama program, putting the spotlight on South Wales Police and why nobody's been brought to book for these cases. And I never stopped, and even today, like I'm not doing as much as I used to because of I got a bit of ill health, but I'm still very much involved in miscarriages of justices. I go around as a motivational speaker around the. Swansea University, Cardiff University, and many others. And I'm lucky that I've managed to rebuild my life to a certain degree, which some others unfortunately haven't. Like we lost another one of our miscarriage of justice victims yesterday in Eddie Browning, who was wrongly convicted of the murder in Cwm Park. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. The amount of people we have lost, Yusuf Abdullahi, and Satish knows where I'm coming from there. We've lost some really good people who've been out and who've had their name cleared but haven't lived to have a proper life, and so far, touch wood, I'm one of the lucky ones.
Going back to that, I mean, Yusuf Abdullahi was a very close friend of mine's, and his brother Rashid, me and Rashid, lived as brothers. For many years until he took his life after his 3 strikes and out. So I'm fully aware of, and I went out with Tony Paris' sister when I first went to Cardiff many years ago. So I know the whole family. I knew, and it was what moved me to get involved in the Cardiff 3 campaign was I knew the people. The only one I didn't know was Stephen Miller, but I knew the people. And I knew it didn't fit. It just didn't make sense. I didn't even hear the evidence. I hadn't even seen the evidence. But I just knew when I saw this thing, and Tony Paris being piled up with John Actie in a murder. And I'm telling you something, if you know the community as well as I did, John Actie and poor Tony Paris probably never said more than 2 words to each other in all the years they lived from one end of the docks to the other. And in fact, John Actie wasn't even a docks boy, really. He was up from Lanrummy. He had family that lived down the docks, which is what brought him down there. Whereas Tony Paris and his family had always lived there. But still, John was known in the docks and familiar to the docks. But John Actie would have more than likely been in our crowd, in the nightclubs and in pubs. Tony Paris wasn't. Tony Paris was, So we know these things. But let's move on to Eddie Browning, because I know we wanted to delve into that just a little, because that was another case that was absolutely appalling, and the way that he's been treated. And now, even posthumously, as he's now passed, the stigma may well stay to rot any decent legacy that could be left after he was freed, right?
Well, yes. I unfortunately, when I found out that Eddie had died, which was yesterday morning, obviously there's a big piece in the local paper, and there's a lot of comments on there saying he's guilty. He was a horrible man. He was this, that, and the other. And, again, we know Eddie wasn't an angel. We know that. But he didn't do this crime, and people can't accept it. And I don't know whether it's ex-police officers or just, people who don't like him. But, I'll give an example. I've commented on the post 34 times to defend him and myself against it being accused of, being guilty of the crime still, And that is appalling. Even after all these years now, people still think that we done the crime. And that's awful. It's the same for Eddie, I know Eddie well. I was in prison with him. I've seen the rough treatment he was, because there was a woman and a baby who got murdered. You can imagine the hard time he had off the other inmates, you know what I mean? And we all gathered together, all the innocent people who were fighting their cases, and said, well, no, you can't be doing this. We believe he's innocent. And we paved the way for him. And I can remember that day. And when Eddie got out, because Eddie got out before me, he did start campaigning and did help me, and I'm very grateful to him. It's just sad that another person like that has passed away. He can't defend himself, and all these bad comments are coming up on Wales Online, and most of them are slanderous. There's no doubt about it.
And it's obviously people that are totally unaware of the facts or the evidence or the real nitty-gritty, and they're just opinionated, and wrongly so. But at the end of the day, I don't believe the Court of Appeals ever releases anybody from a serious sentence like that without a good reason. And although people used to believe that, well, people don't get convicted without good reason, we all know that the reverse is a lot harder. It's a lot harder to win your appeal once you've been convicted than it is to be convicted.
Well, I think what people got to remember, in Eddie Browning's case, it was the Home Secretary who referred the case back to the Court of Appeal before the CCRC was set up, the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And the only cases they send back to the Court of Appeal is only a handful every year, the C3 division. And for them to send the Eddie case back, there must have been merit in that case.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Home Secretary just didn't do it. It was not against the, it went against the grain, the tough policy tough on crime and this, that, and the other, which people seem to forget. So for the Home Secretary to refer the case back, there must have been merit in there. And some of the comments on there today, they've really upset me, but I'm not going to let them show that they've got to me, because I know Eddie didn't do this crime. But this is what most of us get, myself. There was even ludicrous claims that the Cardiff Three were still guilty when they caught the four.
Absolutely.
And
actually, I'd like to comment on that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you both are aware, but during the 2011 trial, the defence of the police officers first said that Gaffour committed the murder along with the Cardiff Five, and he then said, when that didn't fly, that Gaffour had gone first, done minor injuries, and then the Cardiff Five had come along and finished the job off. What is interesting about this is that they say this under the protection of privilege, court privilege, meaning that they can say this without being sued. often they say that they will basically say, why aren't so and so suing us if we say they are guilty? Well, here's the reason. They're not doing it in a manner that can have them sued. So I'm going to say a simple challenge to them. If you truly believe the Cardiff Five are guilty, have the courage to say so outside of the protections of the courts where they can take legal action against you. And if you do not do this, we have our answer that you do not really believe they are guilty.
Absolutely, 100%, Satish, well said. Now, as we kind of get to the last 10, 15 minutes of the show, I do remember there's a few things that we really want to get out, and I'm going to give Michael an opportunity to have a last say towards the end as well. But I suppose now, you've been sentenced, you've had your release, you've campaigned, you've had. Did you get compensation, by the way, Michael?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I was compensated, yes, but they deducted £37,500 for my food and water whilst I was in prison.
Absolutely ludicrous.
They said I would have spent that on the outside anyway, on food and water. Well, I would have had a few more dolly birds in, I think, you know what I mean? And some pizzas and whatever.
Didn't they deduct for room and board as well?
Well, yes, they did. I don't know where they're going to stop. I thought they were going to charge me for my water rates or my council tax. Where do you draw the line?
It's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? But now,
it is.
What we're saying is this, or this is where I want to take us now, is because after the events, and now we look back, now we can look back and see a catalogue and a systematic pattern of incompetence, misleading the public, misleading the jury, misleading the judge, wrongful convictions, right, left, and centre. Oh, bless me. That's a big sneeze. There has to be a call for the accountability of individuals, the stakeholders that partake in these miscarriages of justice, in order for some real transparency and trust to be rebuilt in the criminal justice system.
Absolutely. I'm totally in agreement with that. I used to think a public inquiry was the way forward, but I like Satish's idea of a reconciliation and truth commission, because we need to get to the truth of the matter. We need to know what's gone wrong, how it's gone wrong, and how we can put it right. I know there is miscarriages of justice which are still occurring all over the country. Yeah. I mean, I can name the Kervin 2. Josephette is the latest one in Wales. Yeah. There's more still occurring, and it's because no lessons are being learned. Yeah. And this is why we need some sort of commission, and I support Satish in his efforts to get a truth or reconciliation commission, whatever he wants to describe.
Truth and justice is what I.
Truth and justice is it? Sorry, Satish.
Yeah.
I knew you knew what I meant, didn't you?
I know. Yeah.
I'm just a daft Welshman. Don't worry. I think it's important that we do get accountability, because unless we get accountability, there's going to keep being more and more miscarriages of justices, and it cannot continue. It's not fair. It's not fair on ruining people's lives, the victims' families' lives. In my particular case, the victim's family still think to a degree that we may be involved because of what South Wales Police have done.
So they've got no closure.
They've got no closure, and I do feel for the victim's family. I mean, I don't blame them for feeling the way they do, because they've only been told what the police have told them. So
and they need somebody. They need somebody to hang their hate on.
Yes, I know if it happened to me, I would want somebody to hang it on. You know what I mean, so to speak, because you want to be able to say to somebody, well, it was him, or it was.
Otherwise, what have you got?
Well, yeah, you're clutching at straws. You haven't got nothing, and I do feel, I put a reward money up a long time ago to try and catch the real killer. You know what I mean? And I done it on 2 occasions, and I've done everything I possibly can now, and I just feel because of my age now and because I've got health problems, I have to move on. There's only so much I can do.
Yeah.
You know, there has to be I think there's a lack of will on the police to find the real killer now, because they'll end up in the same situation as the Cardiff Three, where they've had 2 solved cases, and I mean, can the public stomach that? Yeah. And you know, these police officers getting off with it again, and you know, the same procedures, and you know, I don't think they'd get away with it. I don't know. What do you think, Satish?
Well, personally, this is going to sound hard to hear for at least some of you. I actually don't want the police prosecuted. If you have a choice between you prosecute the nasty police and give them their comeuppance for what they did, or, and you can't have both, you find out what happened and prevent it from happening again, I'm firmly on the side of the latter, and I always have been.
I'm kind of with you on that. I can understand why people who have been victims of miscarriages of justice would want the justice back in return.
Well, yeah, I understand it too.
But I'm with you on that, Satish, because what needs to happen is we need to find a way of preventing this from ever happening again for all of the Michael O'Briens and Yusuf Abdullahs and Tony Parises of this world. So that's what do we think is the right way going forward? And first, before you answer that question, the collapse or the failure of the prosecutions against the police officers involved in the Cardiff 5 case, is that detrimental to any future attempt to try and bring consequence or accountability to South Wales, or do you still think that there's a way going forward that in other cases, even such as Michael's or another, that we can get some form of recompense?
Of course it is detrimental. You cannot say that having taken that route and tried to prosecute them and failed to prosecute them, that it isn't detrimental. It plainly is. But what I was going to say with this is that if you actually look at the course of that trial, you could see it was going to fail. And not because the police actually set out to fail. They didn't. What happened with this is that the way the case was presented, you could see that it was going to fail. And the reason it was going to fail is you actually had very, very good, credible evidence that the defense put forward by the police was, and I use these words, quoting a forensic scientist, scientifically ludicrous. They didn't call him. They didn't call him to give evidence at the start to actually show that the Cardiff Five were innocent, which I had actually said right from the start, if you want to prosecute this and prosecute it and have a chance of success, you have to show the Cardiff Five are innocent, because the jury will not care. If you allow them a situation where noble cause corruption can be used as a defence, and I have to say, I find that the most offensive term going. What is ever noble about corruption? But well, to get back to this particular point, they were in a situation where they had a very, very good forensic scientist who demolished the defence that was being put forward scientifically before they even put it forward. If you want to give them the benefit of the doubt for that, give it to them. And then you have the situation where they then start their cross-examination, and the cross-examination is based on this bogus nonsense. And if they don't like my saying that, you know where I am, come and sue me, I'm waiting. But the situation with it, and the reason I'm saying come and sue me is I know I'm in the right and I will defend it, so you won't be getting a free run at it. But the thing with this is that it was a scientifically ludicrous defence, and they could have brought evidence to rebut it, and they didn't. You could see this going on very, very early in the trial. Obviously, I couldn't see it personally because I wasn't there. But I have seen the transcripts of the trial, and I know that this is what's happened. So they must know, or should know, I have access to the transcripts. So I will know what has been said, and I know who said it. and I know how to defend it. And I repeat my claim, my challenge to these people. You ran a defense which I say is scientifically ludicrous. And I say it is scientifically ludicrous with the backing of a forensic scientist. If you truly believe the Cardiff Five are guilty of the murder of Lynette White, say that outside of the protection of the court and let them sue you.
Absolutely.
If not, you are cowards.
And
totally and utter cowards.
And the proof is in the pudding, because I can honestly imagine there'll be nothing but silence in response.
Now, in terms of that, and now I'm going to surprisingly hold out a bit of an olive branch to this, because you would look at this and see that if you prosecute these police officers, they are obviously not going to assist you to try to find out what went wrong. This is where I sort of say you have to make a choice. And or it may come to the point where you have to make a choice. And the choice is, do you try to prosecute them, knowing it's not even in your hands? It is in the hands of prosecutors who do not have the same commitment to justice that you do. I say that because if you look at every single prosecution of police officers, not one has proceeded on the basis that there really was a terrible and egregious miscarriage of justice that needs to be corrected and understood. And if you do not convince jurors to start with that you are dealing with people who are innocent, who are not guilty of this crime, they won't care. And if they don't care, you will give them the grey area to acquit in circumstances where they probably should not. Now, I'm not saying I'm prejudging the verdict on this particular case. It never got to the jury to allow them to reach the verdict. What I am prepared to say is, as far as I can see of the actual prosecution, it was lackluster in the extreme. It was a pathetic attempt to prosecute. And really, what we should have had is the guts to say, we actually do not want these people prosecuted if the consequence of having them prosecuted is we don't find out what happened and prevent it happening again. Because from my point of view, I do not want to see another person go through what Lynette White went through. I do not want to see another person go through what the Cardiff Five went through. I do not want to see another person go through what the South Wales and the whole people of South Wales and families have gone through in that case and in several others. And in that, I include Michael, I include the Newsagent 3, I include the Merthyr Tydfil, all the victims of these cases. There are far too many of them. It's now time that this stopped once and for all, that we find out how these cases keep happening, what we can do to stop it happening again. And finally, I will add, as I usually do, this is not anything new. We are dealing with something that happened in South Wales Police's jurisdiction over 2 centuries before they were a police force. I.e. Dick Penderyn. In 1831, you see the same methods being used to prosecute an innocent man. And in that case, they hanged him. And they hanged him because of the intervention of the then Home Secretary. You may or may not know this, but a city in Australia is named after the Home Secretary who did that. That is where Melbourne got its name from.
Wow. Michael,
Amazing, isn't it?
Michael, Satish has really, set the cat amongst the pigeons there and put out a challenge, a very broad and honest challenge. What sort of changes would you like to see in regards to you personally, and especially the way that you was treated and how your case was handled? Is there anything that you can add to that to really to give us an understanding of what you might see or envisage happening in the future?
Well, I think Satish has covered most of it, I mean, I understand what he's saying about if we got a chance to take the police to court, or do we have a commission and then, don't prosecute them. I have looked at that argument, and I don't know which way I would swing right now. I'd probably swing to Satish's way more, as time goes on, because time is a healer.
Yeah.
time does heal a lot of things. You know, it doesn't heal everything, but it does heal a lot of things. I don't hate the people who've done what they did to me, like the police officers. Or I'm not as angry as I used to be. I feel sorry for them because they had to go to that length to get a conviction. I mean, there must be something wrong with these kind of people. They cannot be normal. Because how do they sleep in their beds at night?
I would imagine with great difficulty. Well, gentlemen, we've actually come to that point where we're at the end of the show. I want to take this opportunity to thank Satish, author and journalist, for the hard work that he's done over the years in supporting people who've been wrongfully convicted and helping on evidence and information that's likely to lead to their release. Great work, and I honour him as a great friend. I count him as a friend whom I've known for many years. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank you, Michael O'Brien, for taking this time out, for sharing your story with us here on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. And again, I'd just like to commend you for not just coming out and getting your fill. And many people have come out of jail and got their compensation and have just got on with their lives, bought themselves a house and tried to live happily ever after. But you've gone right back into the pit. You've gone back into the jungle and you said, it's not right. I'm going to try and do my best to help fix it. And for that, my friend, I take my hat off to you. I commend you. I support you. And we, as a station, and me as a particular program, will look to include you in future endeavours we have, especially when it comes to wrongful convictions here in the UK. Apart from Satish, George Barwood is another one that I normally have on my show, and I think you're aware of George. You know George.
Yes.
And he, you know, we try to get as many UK cases up as we can. So if you guys come up with another one in the UK that we can air out, then I'm quite willing to invite you guys back on again and let's do this all over again. But for now, I just want to say thank you. And if there's anything else that you want to leave us with before you go, your websites, any information that you think that people might need to, or links that they might go to find out any further information, please feel free to do so now.
Well, if anybody wants to look at my story and look at my website, it's www.michaelaobrien.com, and it gives you everything about the case, and also the books that I've got out, my autobiography, you know, about the case. And I just hope people enjoy, you know, I don't know whether to say enjoy it's the right word, but you know, inspires people.
Well, you've motivated us today. I don't know. I think you wanted to say something, Satish.
Yeah, I was going to say that a lot of the stuff I've said has been published in my latest book, Trials and Tribulations, Innocence Matters. You can get that through the Fitted In Project at www.fittedin.org. And lastly, I would actually like to say that the next one is going to be about the tariff situation, because recently found out that the judge who imposed the tariff didn't seem to read the law fully.
Wow. Well, guys, all I can say once again is thank you for your contribution. Thank you for sharing your stories. And I look forward to catching up with you guys again. As for me, Kervin, Julien, Issues Today and World Jam Global Radio, we're out of here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sunday, May 27, 2018, GDS Entertainment proudly presents
Grooving on the Hudson.
That's right, Grooving on the Hudson. Memorial Weekend celebration. Music played by Road International. Selector Oxtail alongside King Shiloh International. All aboard the elegant Paddle Wheel Queens, One World's Fair Marina. Boarding 6 p.m. sharp from Flushing, Queens certified Shea Stadium. Elmis Marina will be selling 7 p.m. sharp. Also,
For tickets, People's Choice Furniture, Bronx, New York. Doors Restaurant, Queens, New York. G's Restaurant, Queens, New York.
Also,
WorldJamGlobal.com.
Also, complimentary dinner prize and surprises.
Come party with us.
Let's just take it slow. Sailing on the summer breeze. 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448. or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, dubplates and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way. Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month.
Reggae dancehall by the beach.
At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.com.